Hi, it's Chris with Implied Music. Today's October 3rd, although you may not be watching it that day, but October 3rd is Steve Reich's birthday. So happy birthday, Steve. An enormous influence on me. An American minimalist composer whose composing procedures have influenced tons of, modern composers, not just in the sort of classical art world, but also in game music and film music. And it's percolated its way into all kinds of progressive music. And in fact, the progressive idea is the thing I want to talk about today, because I want to talk about two things that Steve does with, I'll just say Steve, does with his melodies. He uses accumulation and displacement to create phase relationships. Well, if those three words or that sentence sounds like music theory talk spaghetti, I think by the end of this video, you'll get a sense of what I'm talking about, and it's a great technique. So Reich's early work was with tape. He would take a length of tape, a snippet of audio, speech. Two pieces are come out and it's going to rain. And he'd start with them at exactly the same time and then gradually let them slip out of phase with each other until they built up this sonorous texture. And at some point, he began writing with drums to do the same thing, marimbas, instruments. I think in 1976, the emergence of this piece of music called Music for 18 Musicians was a giant, kind of breakthrough moment for him and his ensemble. And Music for 18 Musicians had a big impact on me as I guess I might have been a senior in high school at that point, or maybe junior. And boy, did it change my mind. There are a couple of musical tricks that are really worth examining in that. Now, I've written a very simple piece of music, and I'm just going to play this, and I'll talk over it a little bit, and then we'll go back and pick it apart. Big D minor 11 chord. And there's our initial statement. It's a melody, it's a riff, it's a sequence, it's what we've been talking about this week. Marimba and vibraphone. And then we pull out a bunch of notes from the phrase. We're going to gradually add them back in. That's the accumulation part. The offset or displacement part is when you grab that same melody and just move it by a beat. Now it's out of phase with the original. Gradually accumulating more notes, and now they're all in. And we're moving the notes out of phase with each other, adding other beats, and then changing from minor to major. We dropped way back down again, just to sort of clear the palette, and then bring it all back in. Now, I don't know about you, but I very often have like musical ideas that are essentially just a simple statement of melody. In this case, a sort of almost a 2 or 3 beat phrase, right? No big deal about it, right? Just 4 beats, ba ba da ba dooby dum, da ba dooby da da. That's it. That's all I had. But how am I going to work with that? Well, that initial statement has essential melodic tones, and those essential melodic tones can be embellished by the secondary tones, and those secondary tones don't have to be there. In fact, typical accumulation phrases will sound kind of thin at first. When you add one note in, suddenly the rhythm bounces a little more. Now I offset the marimba. That offset's interesting. Take a look at what I did on my sequence. So I've actually kept these regions in Logic separate, so I can just slip them by a beat. And you can see these little gaps. Those little gaps are just a beat. And those gaps are what I use to create the out of phase effect. And as they go in and out of phase, or, sort of slip against each other, we get resultant melodies. All these are classic minimalist techniques: accumulation, displacement, and then later on, modal exchange. And the modal exchange is super fun too. So let's go to the key change. We'll listen to how that works. So we're percolating happily along in D minor. And then we just take the F to F sharp, the C to C sharp, and it's kind of bright for a moment. And then we're going to have a recapitulation, reminding you of the essentials of the piece, and then open it back up again. There's tons of music that you can check out of Reich's. And I think a lot of it has this slow, process-oriented compositional approach. This is a kind of a late 20th century idea in minimalist composing. The idea that the narrative or story of the piece isn't a secondary target, but rather the actual evolution of the piece itself becomes the story. As the melody accumulates more and more notes, my ear is more and more engaged with it and more interested in figuring out how things work. Instead of creating a narrative arc by, establishing a theme, a motif, and then putting it in harmonic peril and then bringing it home again, what we're doing is we're following the construction of the piece. It's like I was watching a movie and the protagonist of the movie wasn't the hero, but rather the director, which I have to confess to some degree is sort of how I think. When I heard Reich's music for the first time, I realized I was hearing a different orientation towards what it meant to appreciate a composition. And I just value this enormously. He's a rigorous thinker and has a very strong personal, music theory. These basic ideas, accumulation, displacement, phase relationships, have shown up since in so much music. And it's a really important part of sort of film and game composing right now, but also appears in like progressive house music, right? Anybody who works with loops has played around with these ideas. Drumming, which is one of his early pieces, uses it extensively. And when Reich goes to college campuses to teach these ideas, he does a simple piece with clapping for a couple of people. Can you pull this off with clapping? You can. You can learn the idea very simply. It's fascinating to me. Well, Steve Reich, to my mind, a giant of the contemporary American composers. I hope this has been useful. Like and subscribe and ding the bell to be notified when I do my videos. I'll see you next time.